2, 3, 4.
Shoo up, my sugar, shoo up, my little butterbean.
Down, diddy, down, 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 diddy, diddy, down, diddy, down, down, do I do it, down, diddy, down, down, you're so pretty, pretty, down, diddy, down, down. Ain't it funny how fun love can be? Diddy, 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 down, diddy, down, 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 diddy, diddy, down, diddy, down, down.
And the Norfolk Knitting School is open. It's the first day, and I'm so glad you've joined me. I assume that if you're wanting to learn to knit, that you know what a great hobby this is, what a great pastime this is. There's infinite possibilities for creativity. It's fun. It's portable, which means a lot to me. That's why I gave up sewing. I couldn't take it with me when I had places to go. And you end up with a beautiful item that's probably totally unique in the whole world. However, there's a couple of circumstances that I need to mention to you right off the bat when you're knitting that you have to respect. You need to know what to do to complete a project. I mean, that sounds obvious, but there's knitters who say, well, they see something, they say, well, I want a sweater with cuffs or with collar, I want this pocket. And then they go to make something and they don't have the skill and the different techniques, and it ends up being just a very frustrating disaster, waste of time, not to mention the money. Then there's other knitters who feel like they'll never be able to make a sweater, they could never decrease, they can't add on stitches, and they could never do anything but, baby blankets and scarves. And that's okay. Some people just really want to do that, but I can show you things that you can put on the scarves and on the blankets to make them really beautiful. So we're going to have class hopefully once a week. It will be on YouTube, so you can go back and watch it, but each session I'll repeat what I did in the previous class. There is a website. I have an email, and so what I'd like you to do is email me with questions or requests. If there's something that you want me to cover or you have a question what you've done. The email is knitlife1@hotmail.com. And I will read those, and I'm hoping maybe some of my viewers, some of you, will come on the show and show us what you've done, or come on and show us what the problem is that you're having, and we can work it through at the show. And it's really nothing to be scared of. Everybody's very nice here, and it's nothing to be afraid of. So I'm hoping to do that. I'm also hoping, I'm not a master knitter, but I have friends who are, and I'm hoping that I can get some of them once in a while to come on and show what they've been doing and talk about some of their knitting experiences. So one of the things I guess what we should talk about first are materials. I've just got something here to show you. Now, if you go to take a class in a yarn store, and they're very available, what they really want you to do, or maybe almost insist that you do, is buy the yarn there and the needles there. Well, I would rather see you go to Michael's in Mansfield, or go to A.C. Moore, which is over, I think is in Bellingham. I want you to get something like this. Now, this is an acrylic. I believe this is, I've got the label right here, and I'll talk to you about labels in just one second. Yeah, this is acrylic. This is inexpensive. You can throw this in the machine. And I'd like you to get a pair of needles, maybe like a size, these happen to be 5s. But 5 or 6 is very easy to use. It's not, the big needles are kind of tricky to use, and the little tiny ones. And I may as well just show you here. I had bought this little set at a yard sale, or I don't know where. This is very old. And, you very rarely, now here's some of the needles are missing. These are double pointed for making socks, which I didn't even start doing that myself until a few years ago. And I started knitting when I was 12, which is more than half a century ago. This is a number 1, and people years ago used to actually, they didn't have all these options for yarn. People used to, it was quite common that people would work with these number 1s. You almost never see anybody using these little tiny, because it takes a long time, a very long time when you're making something with these small needles. So just to mention what you'll need for our classes, I would get a pair of 5 or 6 needles. I would get plastic. I wouldn't bother with trying to get wood. I mean, there's all kinds of fancy needles. We were talking about this at the beginning before the show started. I mean, there are lighted needles so you can knit in the dark. There are wooden needles. There's bamboo. There's all sorts of needles with Murano glass on the ends. You don't need all that. Certainly not to start. And of course, the size of the needle is right on the bottom here of the needle itself. So when you go in, and you'll see in the package, they'll show you too. You'll see the package. And so a yarn, this weight is called sport weight, and this is something I think will be very easy. This is what I'm going to use to show you today when we do casting on, and we'll start doing the knit stitch. Now, when you do buy, let me also mention this. All yarn, except the very, very cheapest, and again, just buy something inexpensive to start with while you're learning. But the information on the label will tell you what the gauge is, the best gauge at which to use this yarn. I'm going to show you something. I have a little demonstration here to show you. So you'll see, and you'll also see the other important thing is the color and the dye lot. Now when you start making your project, you want to go and check that the color and the dye lot, and here it is 219 for the lot, color 2880 on this particular skein. You always want to get enough yarn to complete your project in these same colors, the lot and the color. Now let's say you make a mistake, or for some reason they don't have they don't have enough of the color and the dye lot. Well, a little thing you can do, which I'll also remind you about later, is if the dye lot is like 1 or 2 numbers off or slightly off, you can work, and I'll show you how, with 2 different skeins to mix the colors, so you won't see a slight demarcation in the colors. Alrighty, let's see. Now let me talk to you about gauge. Now gauge, it's not so important for a scarf. And by the way, I'm going to work right along with you and make miniature versions of the project. So next time we'll be starting on a scarf. I've also got some of things that I've made to show you which are made sort of like scarves, but really are garments. As a matter of fact, this is something that I made myself, what I'm wearing. And I mentioned before embellishments. That's what I've done here. These are two different yarns together. There's this yarn, and then I've added it to this yarn. This is a cotton, and I've put these 2 together. Now this is something you can do. And you can buy yarn, for example, you can buy yarn has different strands in it, like this, or more than even 2, or you could go and buy your own and mix it. It's more expensive, of course, but it's a lot of fun to do, and you can have something that's totally unique. You can buy different yarns and work them together. So all this is a crochet chain stitch, and I just attached it. I just hooked it on here and attached it, and that was what I added to make this this decoration on the cuff here. All right. Let's look at my gauge swatch. Now, again, gauge is essential. Gauge means the number of stitches per inch. And again, on here, this gauge is expressed here as 24 stitches to 4 inches. Let me get my little 24 stitches to 4 inches on US 5 needles. Now the European needles have a millimeter designation, and then here they've written it in French, and here it is in Spanish. Now, so what I've done here is, my goodness, I almost lost I used needles from this set. I used 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I started with size 2 needle, and I went to a 3, And you don't, it's kind of subtle. You'll see it. I went to a 4 around through here, and he ended up with a 5. So if you look at this, you can really see the difference there in the, sorry. Okay, now, I've placed needles here on either side of 12 stitches. So you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you just want to, when you're counting, you can use your needle, and you just want to put your needle right in that little V. That's the stitch there. Now, this is something, now again, as I say, we'll be starting with a scarf. But the reason the gauge is important is down here where I use the needle number 2, it's very stiff. This is what they call, it's called hand. The way a fabric feels is its hand. So this has a stiff hand, and up here this has a softer hand. So I think you can see, I can barely open this up down here, whereas up here you can see this. Now, the way this little device works, and I must have bought 20 of these in my lifetime. You see this has this is for you to check your needle size. Ruler here, inches, up here, the millimeters. This is for you to put down on your yarn, on your knitting, and it allows you to look at 2 inches of the fabric that you've knitted. So this shows me that I've got 4.5 stitches to the inch. Now let me see if I can, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, well, close to 5. Let's try it up here, because I know this was where this is where I was using needle, size 5 needle. Sorry, I hope you can see this. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Down here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And actually what they really want you to do is count the 2 inches in case you've sort of got, now actually when you look at this, and this is, I'll grant you this is kind of tricky because it depends on, if I were home I'd have this flat. I've got this sort of holding up so the camera can see. They want you to count over 2 inches. And the swatch is supposed to be 4 inches. So when I got up here, let's see if I did get up to 4 inches, just about 4 inches at the top. Of course, the bottom is much smaller. It's only going to be 3 inches. So if I had made the mistake and tried to knit with this yarn, and I used the size 2 needle, and the directions say cast on 100 stitches. If I'm working at 6 to the inch, then I'm going to make it's going to be smaller than if I'm at the 5 to the inch. So we'll still talk about this some more. I just wanted to bring this up and mention it to you. So if you have, again, for example, let's say you have, if you're making let's say you want to make your scarf 10 inches wide. When you make your gauge and you say, well, gee, this feels right to me. And of course, the scarf, it's not going to have to fit you, but you do want it to feel with the right amount of softness. Then I say, all right, it's 5 stitches to the inch. I'm making a scarf that's 10 inches wide. I need 50 stitches. And that's how it works. But with a sweater, which has to fit you around the bust, the arms, and the hips, I mean, it can just be a complete disaster if your gauge is off. You'll end up with something that's too small or too big. So we'll revisit that because, As a matter of fact, let me show you something else here that I've got. Now this happens to be, this happens to be the Yankee Knitter Designs. It's an old-fashioned company of an old company of patterns, and this is the sock pattern that I use. I have friends that make socks. They're just unbelievable, and they use all different patterns. I stick with this. I'm a little nervous still about knitting socks. I've made probably about 8 or maybe 7 or 8 pairs, but I still rely on this very closely. Now here they're talking about the different weights of yarn. I think I mentioned that this is actually a worsted weight. But here they talk about fingering, which is very thin, sport weight, which is this approximately, sport weight, and worsted weight, which is the thickest, and that would be something like this. This is worsted. And actually, you know what? Actually, this is more sport weight. And sometimes, you know, with some of these yarns, they can be in between the two. You kind of have to make a judgment call. So now they've talked about the yarn here, needles. Now for the fingering weight, they want you to use a number 2 or size needed to obtain gauge. And they talk about the gauge down here. We'll look at that in a second. Sport weight, number 4 needles. Worsted, number 5. And then here's the gauge. Fingering, 7.5 to 1 inch, which would have been smaller than what I had showed you on my swatch. The sport weight, 6.5 to 1 inch. Worsted, 5.5 to the inch. And I really, to tell you the truth, I hate to see them to say 6.5, because my goodness, I mean, you know, it's one thing to count your stitches, and then to go with a half. I guess when you have the 2 inches, maybe then that you can kind of, you know, figure out the half in there. But okay, so it's to check gauge with suggested needle cast on 30 stitches for fingering, 26 for sport, or 22 for worsted. So this is just about these variations in the knitting, in the yarn weight and the needles. So I believe, let's see, now I guess, let me show one other thing before we start the actual, let me show you this, as long as we're still talking about needles. When I bought this a long time ago, it was $50, but this was a wonderful purchase. They make a fancy one now called Turbo Added something, the Turbo something or other. And they're not plastic, they're metal, they're stainless steel. This is all plastic. But I use these because what you do is you're working on it becomes a circular needle. However, you can knit backwards and forwards on these. So just about all the knitting I do now is on these. So instead of joining to knit in a circle, which is the original purpose of these, if you're doing, say, the neckline, usually it's a neckline on something because you're working all the way around and it's joined. But I work back and forth on these. So, you know, if you do see these, this is the Denise, it's called. And I just think, you know, and the real advantage to this is that the needles don't slip out and fall, because I have had needles fall out while I've been dashing around with my knitting, and I've lost a needle. But this way, it's impossible to lose these. So that was just one thing that I did want to show you. And if you want to make these extra long, there's a little connector here, and this you put on the end. If you want to, there's a time when you might want to hold your stitches and just have them sort of blocked off. You use these. But that is all in due time, my darlings. All right. Now, I guess what I'm going to show, you know, I think we're going to take a break because I don't want to start this and then stop. I've started doing some cast-on. So if you want to get your needles ready and your yarn, I'm going to show you next, right after our break, how to cast on. That's the first thing you do. So don't go anywhere. You stay with me, and I'll be right back.
Shoo-up, shoo-ah, hey honey, shoo-up, shoo-ah. Look, see, shoo-up, shoo-ah. It's funny, shoo-up, wop, how silly love can be. Down, diddy, down, da, down, da, down, diddy, diddy, down, diddy, down, da, down, do-ah, do-ah, down, diddy, down, da, down. You're so pretty, pretty, down, diddy, down, da, down.
Welcome back to the Norfolk Knitting School. As promised, I'm going to start this has all been a lesson, but I'm going to show you how to cast on. Now, I happen to have here a size 5 needle. I've got my acrylic yarn. I will call this sport weight. This is what you do. This is called the long tail method, and I'm going to make a very long tail because while you're practicing, I'm going to be also continuing to cast on so you can watch me. So you take your yarn and leave yourself a good amount because you're practicing, and you're going to make a little slip knot like this. So I'll do that again. Just take it here, bring this through. Most people know how to do these. This is pretty simple. And you tighten it up onto your needle. Now, one of the things that happens with new knitters is that you're nervous, and so often you will knit very tightly, and that's something that you'll get over as you become more, and it's all a question of the muscles in your hand, how comfortable you are with holding the needles, and that will come to you. Now I take my yarn like this. So I've got the tail. Excuse me. This goes to the ball of yarn. This is my tail. And I've got it like this. So I've got here over the thumb. I'm holding it here. I've got it like this. Now these shows are shown on YouTube, so you can always go back and watch that and stop it and start it. And I pick up here, and I pull it. Now I'm just going to continue doing this, and you just go ahead and watch. So I have 2 stitches now. So I'm like this, and I've got to get my tension back. And tension is something that you need to maintain when you're knitting. And I'll show you when we start to knit, show you how you do that. So I go here and here, and I pull. And now I have 3 stitches. So I go take my yarn again. So, sorry. I'll tell you, this knitting, it's a funny thing. You can be knitting, your whole life, and then when you start to go and show somebody something that's so natural to you, and there's the stitch, okay? So just kind of hold this here like this, and okay, so now I've got, and these are going to be kind of tight on here because everything's kind of held by this little at the bottom here. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to tell you a story about when I started to knit. I think I was 12, and my mother showed me how to do what I'm showing you now. But she took me over. I don't know if any of you might have happened by any chance to have grown up in Washington, D.C. Okay, see, just to show you again. Okay, so this, here, and that. So there was this department store where they had a knitting department, and in those days, there weren't all these incredibly fancy yarns, all the metallics, and like the one I had showed you earlier with the 2 strands, and I mean now it's just amazing what they have. But at the time they just had pretty much worsted wool, and the acrylic was just something that was brand new. So okay, now see, I made a little mistake there. I didn't watch my yarn come through. Okay. And so my mother picks out this dreadful, hideous, dark, murky olive because although my mom, but not my dad, grew up in a wealthy family, but she was very, I don't want to say stingy. She was very parsimonious, let's say. She was very careful about spending things. And so she thought this was a color you could wear with everything. Well, it was just dreadful. And the first sweater I made was a raglan sleeved turtleneck sweater, which I kept for years just sort of as a memento, but it was really, and it was a raglan sleeve is a sleeve that comes, instead of coming up on your shoulder like this, it comes up this way and it comes right up to the collar. So this is all sleeve up in here, unlike this where my sleeve ends here, this one that I made. And oh boy. All right, so we're going to just go along here. I'm going to make some more. I have a friend who was a very obsessive knitter. And what she used to do is every row she knitted on a sweater, she marked on a piece of paper. By the way, excuse all the scratches on my hand, but I had to cut some dead wood out of the bush, and I couldn't put my gloves on because the loppers were slipping out of my hand. So, it looks kind of bad, but. And so she wanted to make it exactly right. And I'm just going to show you again. So it's in here, here, okay, and then I kind of come down and I kind of hold it this way. So I've got a little bit of tension, and I release it and I pull it. And I remember one time that she made some sort of a mistake in spite of all this notation, which to me sort of took the joy out of knitting. And she was so angry and so frustrated that she cut it up with a pair of scissors. Cut up the whole sweater right there, then and there with a pair of scissors. Now, we've all made mistakes, and we've all had sweaters that didn't work out. And every single knitter, I don't know of anybody except the ladies and the people that just only ever do a scarf or baby blankets. But once you start doing some other things, excuse me, wait a minute here. Okay. And no, wait a minute, there we go, okay. Okay, here we go. I got a little, I was just a little distracted there. We're back to where we're supposed to be. And everybody's had an occasion where they've ripped something out, started all over again. And when we go on with the lessons, I'll show you how to do that, or how to fix errors. Okay. Now I'm going to give you a little time there to practice. I'm going to continue with this. I've still got some more yarn here, because what you want to do is watch me and practice as you're going. So again, visualize this again. Here, here. Now, there are lots of knitting books. I'm going to show you one in a minute where they have drawings where they show you how to do this. They're helpful. Sometimes they're not. It depends on, how many steps they show you. Sometimes they'll use like a little arrow and they'll show you going this way and through here. I think it's helpful to see somebody actually doing it. Now, there's a knitting group that meets on the third Thursday of the month at the Walpole Public Library. I think it starts at 7. And some of those people are what I would call like master knitters over there. But not all of us. Certainly I'm not, as I said. And they're very helpful. I mean, of course, they all come and bring their own projects, but if you come with a problem, they will help you. And it's a lot of fun. And then usually people bring something to eat. There's a man that comes with his wife, and he is actually he works with wrought iron. He's a good Lord, I can't think. It's some sort of I can't think of it. But he works in wrought iron, and makes decorative railings and that kind of thing. And then he knits socks, and he's a much better sock knitter than I am. I mean, he really. But you don't see too many men knitting. And the other reason I was really that's one of the reasons I was really kind of excited about this show, is that I feel that knitting is sort of a skill, a knowledge that women should hand down to each other, or men could hand down to boys, I suppose. But it's I don't know. It's a woman's thing. I mean, let's just be honest about it. But he's awfully good with those. And knitting socks is something that is really something you have to learn. You use double pointed needles, so that there's nothing back here to keep the knit. Now, okay, here we go. Now, let me count my stitches, and you can count yours. 69. Oh, add another one here. All right. Okay. Now, I'm going to set this down for a minute. I want to show you a book that I have here. We'll talk again about gauge. Now, this is called The Book of Sweater Patterns. Basic designs in multiple sizes and gauges. And they still make this book. And okay. Now what they show you here is, they show you, here is the gauge you're working in. Okay, this first little section, child sizing, but they go all the way through. I mean, they've got saddle shoulders, which is something you don't see very often, and they've got cardigans, and there's just about everything you can think of, you see. But let's start with the child here, because the numbers are low. So for a 26-inch circumference, that would be around the chest. Then you look here and you see what your gauge is. And you remember that on the little label, well, here's another one here. This is bamboo. On the label, they will give you and tell you 5 stitches to the inch. 5 stitches to the inch on size 7. So if you were working at the 5 stitches to the inch, they're suggesting the yarn requirement. And I don't know, okay, meters and yards. All right, so 490 yards, 448 meters. This is a little bit problematic because some yarns, their yardage when it's knit up will vary. It's something that you kind of learn with experience, and usually in the yarn shop, sometimes people can kind of give you a heads up on that and tell you. Okay, now over here, the back of the pullover. And you always start with the back so that if you make a mistake, it's on the back. All right, so we're at 5 stitches to the inch. They tell you to cast on 64 stitches. Now, that's because actually I did this little thing back here. I was looking up here at the gauge, the 3 to the inch. Tell you to cast on 40, and what happens is you divide 3 stitches into 40, and you're getting 13 inches. 13 inches worth of stitches at 3 to the inch when you cast on 40. And of course, 13 times 2, 13 inches times 2 inches is 26 inches, which would be the circumference of the. So I just wanted to show this to you. You can buy these you know, and it just goes on and on and on. Set-in sleeves. They show you collars in here in the back. There's a section, if I can find it here, there's a section where they explain about collars and so forth. But right now it's not. And this is something else you just might want to look at. You see, most sweaters are based on a rectangle. Now they're showing a cardigan here, so they've got they've got this would have been the back, the front would have had the front here where the cardigan would come in. Here they're showing you the variation for a round neck, and here it is for a V-neck. And you see here, it's just a rectangle, and your sleeve here, this, with folded in half, would just come right on to here, and you've got your measurements here. So for example, here it shows that you're going to be 2 inches, the neckline here opens 2.5 inches down. So it's a little, for me, it's reassuring to look at these diagrams and see that you're really working with, essentially with, with rectangles. Now here these are a different kind of sleeve here, so you wouldn't be, but for the most part, you're working with a rectangle. I am going to show you. We're going to work on a vest that's made as a rectangle, and is very, very easy to do. And now let us get started here with knitting. Now the simplest. There are 2 stitches, and all patterns are made up of these 2 stitches. And sometimes you might have an extra loop, you might skip a stitch, you might wrap the needle around, but let's just start with regular knitting. And if you only do this stitch I'm showing you, you will have something that's called garter. So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to start. Now, you put your needle in here through the back. You take this around. Now, some people like to just hold it and wrap it. And it might be what you'd want to do. Bring it through and push it off, and that's your first stitch. Now, when you're knitting from your cast on, it gets a little loose there, but don't worry about that. Now, I like to hold my yarn this way. I like to hold it this way, and then I wrap it this way. So, let's just so let's look at that. But I'll do it the old-fashioned simple way for you. Okay, so behind here, bring this in and pull through and off. And you want to keep your stitches kind of pushed up here so you're not stretching. So in the back, there. Okay, and I'm just going to, while you're practicing and watching, I'm just going to go right ahead here. I probably should have put on fewer stitches because this will take me a while to get to the end. But you're going to be practicing. So behind here, this, there we go, and through. And now you see what you've got here. Now, when you do this particular stitch all the way one row after the other, this is what you're going to keep seeing over and over again. Now, I've got some things to show you that I brought with me, which will show you some things knitted up and made. Now, I like this manner of holding the yarn. So I'm like this. I go here, there, and this. And then I wrap here to get my tension, and there. And there we are. Now, I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you, while you're practicing there, well, I'll stay with you a little longer here. All right, now you might want to rest your hands for a minute, and while you do so, if you're not used to this, you'll probably want to rest, so we'll take a little rest, and I'm going to show you something else here while we're here. Okay, now, there's a bunch of books like this. This is one that I like to use, and it's a book of stitches, and this is, well, I guess you would say yes, this is for an advanced knitter. But what I want to point out to you is that they're all stitches, all the decorative stitches that there are made with either a knit stitch or a purl stitch. Now here they're talking about cable stitches. You may have heard of cable stitches. And you need a little extra needle to do this. And what it involves is twisting. And you see these on the Irish, which is why I chose Irish music for the show, because I wanted to pay homage to Irish knitters. I mean, if there was ever a country which is where the best knitters are, I guess it would have to be Ireland. And then they say twisted and other stitches. Now, even so, and then they give you here the symbols to make these stitches. But what I want to do, for example, if you look at this, this is all knitting, one row after the other. This in here is purl. This is what is called stockinette, which is one row of knitting, one row of purl. We'll look at that. And then here's where they use the cable stitch to twist it. So with those two stitches, knitting and purling, you can make, now here is purl, and this is knit, and then here they've twisted it. So, I don't want to discourage anybody or frighten anybody, but just to show you that really things are maybe not quite as complicated as they seem. Here, this is garter, this is knit every stitch, right there. This is what's called stockinette, knit a row and purl a row. And these little bumps here are purl stitches. And this is here, stockinette. All right, so let us go back, if you had your rest. And I'm going to move ahead here, but you can continue to watch me. I'm going to speed up a little bit, but I've still got a bit more to go, so you've got plenty of examples. Now, if you notice, this is the way I like to knit. I like to run my finger across. This was that little dipsy doodle that came in there when I got a little mixed up and I wasn't paying attention. That'll be all right. But if you're carrying the yarn, that's perfectly fine too. So let me just remind you that my email is knitlife1. They'll probably put it on the screen for you. knitlife1@hotmail.com. And I don't think I told you my name because I was so excited about the first day of school. I'm Anne Marie Battistone. So you can just address it to Anne Marie, and you don't even need to do that. Just, lay out your problem, and when I do the next class, I can perhaps address it. And I will also answer you if it's something that I can explain to you in an email. I will do that. Okay, so Now when we come to the end here, we'll just take a little pause, and then I'll show you how to go with your next row. We're going to still do this knitting stitch because I want you first to learn the garter. And as I said, I have some items that I made to show you with this straight knitting and what you can do with it. All right, so there we are, and as you can see now it looks much longer. Actually, I almost got too many stitches on here for this little 10-inch needle. But this is what it should look like. And if you drop the stitch, don't worry, just keep on going. This is why you are going to have some inexpensive yarn and just an inexpensive needle like this. And if you go back and you watch this, and when you go back and watch on the YouTube, you'll see this all again, and you can practice again if you watch the show and you didn't have your materials ready to go or anything there. And the back, it looks like this. So this is what you should be seeing. So we'll be right back. And don't go away, because we'll be right back. I'm going to do the next row. Got something to show you that I made, very, very simple, something that you can do. This is a shawl that I cast on my stitches down here. This is all the stitch that I showed you over and over again, row after row. I shaped it here, and this is mohair and probably acrylic. And you can see, if you look here, this is on a very big needle. So although it looks very different than what you were just seeing, this is that same knit stitch. And then I shaped it. I cast off. By the time I finished it, I had all this on a round needle. So this whole thing was where I ended up. And this is my cast off row. I came up here. I added on it to make this shape. Now here is, now we were talking about over and over about scarves. Well, this is a rectangle, obviously. And what it is again, here, all knit, what I showed you. This happens when you wrap the yarn around, you come back, I'll show it to you, and you have this long space in here. So what I did was I found this button that I added on here. There it is, and I sort of tied it. And the way this is worn is simply to put this around yourself, and you can do an asymmetrical thing if you like, and where these large stitches come in, I just button it, and there I am. Now, garter stitch, which is all knitting, it's very stretchy, and it stretches this way as well. So when I'm home, I can kind of stretch this so it comes around the back. And there you see around the back, and here's the front. And there we are. Now I could button this elsewhere and have it be, a little more even at the bottom, but you get the idea. And this last thing here, again, all garter, all knit stitch, the knit stitch I showed you. What this is two pieces that was joined here. And I think, I made this a long time ago, I think these were just two rectangles put together, and because of the nature of this yarn and the stitch, it kind of opened up like this. But I could be wrong about that. This might be shaped. But my point is that this is all what I just showed you today, and you would make, and so something like this, you would merely put over yourself, and it's really very, it's a very fashionable look, just sort of to hang like this. And the back's kind of caught up, but there we go. Now you're saying, well, gee, what happened here? Well, I'll show you. When you use a large needle like this, it's very easy for these things to kind of get pulled. But all you have to do is pull it back into shape, because there is no mistake here. It's just that one of the little stitches got pulled, so I just kind of go like this and pull it, and it all sort of pretty much comes back together. And then sometimes you take a little crochet hook and you can kind of adjust the little stitches. So just again to show you that there's all kinds of things that you can make. You don't just have to have a conventional rectangular, scarf, B-flat scarf.
Hey honey, shoo-up, shoo-ah. Look, see, shoo-up, shoo-ah. It's funny, shoo-up, wop. I silly love candy. Down, diddy, down, 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 diddy, diddy, down, diddy, down, down. Do-ah, 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 down, diddy, down, down. You're so pretty, pretty, down, diddy, down, down.
Okay. Now, during the break, I went ahead and continued knitting here. I want you to see, and if I had larger needles, I thought maybe I should use the same size needles as you. But if you look here, you can see that these little stitches here that look like V's, those are knitting stitches. Now you're saying, well, what is this? What's this here? Well, when I came back from this way across, you see, this was what I started with over here. And you see the little V's over here as well. You can kind of see them. You can kind of see those little V's. Okay, very good. See them, little V's? Very good. Okay, so I'm going to go back. I came back around. I started over here. And I did this during the break. So now you can come back with me. And what I'm doing now is all knit every row. And this is what is called garter. Why, I don't know. It's called the garter stitch. Knit all the rows. Now, so let me show you my swatch again for a second. This side is the knit stitch. This side is the purl, which I haven't shown you. It's really the same stitch, except that you go in the front of the needle instead of the back. Now, when this appearance of this is called stockinette. When they talk about stockinette, and most of the time on your patterns, they'll have you do your swatch, your gauge, in stockinette, which is knit on this side, purl on this side, and this is the way the fabric looks. Now the fabric will roll. It naturally rolls up. Some people, when they make their scarves, they kind of like that. They've kind of got this long tube, and they kind of like that. And that's certainly something you can do. I would suggest making your first scarf with garter, with all knit, and you're going to have a little border stitch, which I will show you. So stockinette, but these are made of knit stitches, and these are purl stitches. So I'm going to just go along here. I'm going to finish this row here, and you might be able to sort of get an idea. And with the garter stitch, there's no back or front. Where you can tell what's just the back or front, if you're concerned about that, you can tell at the very bottom, and I'll show you that. And I'll use your method if this is what you're using. So and you can kind of feel that little stitch go in there, and it kind of clicks in. And you want to spread your yarn, spread this down so you don't get all bunched up. Bring this up here. And my camera woman is just doing a fabulous job with these. I'm so impressed, Katie. All right, now I've come to my second row. You look over here. Now you see two 2 rows of little bumps. And this is actually, I would call this the front side because you have this little edge right down here. Oops. Whereas over here, I don't know, some people might like that for the front. It's really up to you. But this will give you a better idea. When I show you the yarn, the items that I've made, I think you'll be able to recognize the garter stitch. And because this is acrylic, I'm getting all these little things down here. And this is why people don't like acrylic. They like to work with cotton and wool. But you can wash acrylic, and as I said, it's inexpensive, and if you screw everything up, you just start over and you haven't spent a lot of money. So there we are. That's our 2 rows of knitting. So I hope, you know, so I'm going to, as I say, I'm going to show you these, items before the end of the show. And I hope that you've learned something. Please, again, knitlife1@hotmail.com. Please let me know how this went for you. I'm dying to hear. And so thank you so much. I'm Anne-Marie Battistone. You're watching Norfolk Cable, and this is the Norfolk Knitting School. Thank you for being my student.
Shoo-up, shoo-ah, my bee. Shoo-up, shoo-ah, my sugar. Shoo-up, up, my little butterbean.
Down, diddy, down, 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 diddy, diddy, down, diddy, down, down, do I do it, down, diddy, down, down. You're so pretty, pretty, down, diddy, down, down. Ain't it funny how fun love can be? Diddy, 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 down, diddy, down, down,